Hi everyone, my name is Isabel, and today I am taking a walk through the Waterfall Fire Interpretive Trail at Western Nevada College in Carson City, Nevada. In this walk, I will show you what happens before and after there has been a wildfire. By comparing burned to non-burned areas, you will be able to see what a fire can do and what you can do to prevent a fire or help out after the fire has occurred. Come on, let's go! Wildfire is a natural part of the West, and they have been playing a natural role in shaping or defining the ecosystem of western North America since plants have been growing. In the West, wildfires caused by lightning strikes during thunderstorms have caused patches of land to burn every 15 to 30 years. Lately, though, wildfires have occurred more frequently and increasing intensity in Western America, which is right here where I am walking. One of the reasons for more wildfires and stronger ones is the presence of invasive plant species like cheatgrass and tumble mustard, as well as a changing climate. Cheatgrass arrived in the Great Basin, where Nevada lies, when the railroads were first being built. These plants are thought to have come from Asia and Eurasia. The Waterfall Fire of 2004 burned and destroyed the dead trees you see in these mountains. It was one of the biggest fires the area has ever seen. It all started around 3 in the morning, Wednesday, July 14th, 2004, at a campsite near the waterfall in Kings Canyon, Carson City, which is why it was given the name the Waterfall Fire. The fire consumed 8,799 acres, 66 buildings, including homes and businesses, were lost or damaged, and 51 vehicles burned. Luckily, and most importantly, no lives were lost. Now, 6 years later in 2010, you can see what the fire has done. The landscape you see here was burned, and it is a disturbance regime, also known as a fire regime. A fire regime is an area where the vegetation becomes more vulnerable to wildfires because of invasive weeds. Shortly after the fire, the Burned Area Emergency Response Team report predicted that the invasive weed cheatgrass would have a very high threat. All the brown you see on the ground is cheatgrass, and its scientific name is Bromus tectorum. Although there is other vegetation around, cheatgrass is definitely the most abundant. With a closer look, we can see that cheatgrass is now very dry and brown, which makes it much easier to ignite than sagebrush and other green plants surrounding it. The seeds at the top come off and plant themselves to grow again year after year, and just as I have thrown them, the wind carries and blows to many more places. Only now is it obvious that the predictions made from the Burned Area Emergency Response Team report were correct. This is a small section of many acres of land infested with invasive weeds, so how about we move on to a bigger picture. This area around me was burned, and there is a bunch of invasive weeds. The darker green shrubs are bitterbrush, while the lighter green is sagebrush, and they are native to the land. Most of the brown you see everywhere is cheatgrass. As I said earlier, this is a fire regime, and it means it can catch fire more easily than other places that weren't burned. Since it is a fire regime, we must be even more careful, especially since the changing climate is making spring come early and fall in later. During this time of heat and dry weather, cheatgrass can be a ticking time bomb. Compared to other vegetation, cheatgrass ignites in a snap, and once it ignites, it's a potential danger. That's why we must be extra careful in areas like this. The dirt in this area is infested with non-native grasses. All hope isn't lost, though, because there are areas left that weren't burned, and the difference is visible. Right away, I can tell a difference walking through this unburned area. It's much greener, and there is not much invasive weed. Also notice how much taller the shrubs are, some almost as tall as me, and I'm over 5 feet. Not only are the shrubs taller, but the dominant over other vegetation. This is good because since the dominant vegetation is green, it is harder to catch fire during the hot and dry summer days. Unlike the cheatgrass I smelled earlier, this sagebrush smells fresh and green. It doesn't smell dry and plain like cheatgrass. Speaking of cheatgrass, the soil here is almost completely absent of it. Getting a closer look, the soil in this unburned area part lacks the invasive weed that the burned area had much of. Stroking my hand through the dirt, I feel no invasive weeds. It is basically all dirt. I can take some in my hand and see it fall like sand does. Next, let's go compare what a burned and unburned forest looks like. Here we are at Lakeview Park near Western Nevada College campus. Look at how green and big it is out here. I look tiny compared to all the tall trees and shrubs. This part of the forest was not burned, and we can see all kinds of green plants and some healthy, enormous trees. Although there is some cheatgrass, it is hardly visible and definitely not dominant. The huge trees are Sierra Nevada ponderosa pine, and the understory is made up of manzanita, sagebrush, bitterbrush, rabbitbrush communities. Thanks to all this vegetation, the area feels cooler than the desert areas we saw before. This section of the forest was lucky to have been saved, but a section right next door was not as lucky. This location is literally next to the bright green forest area I was at, and the differences are obvious. Here the understory is brown and black, with only about 10% of the vegetation being green. Efforts have been made to rehabilitate this part of the forest, but it seems the efforts have not been very successful. Take this tree as an example. This whole side of the tree is black from being burned. All I have to do is pinch it a little and pieces of charcoal come right off. Then those pieces easily crumble into ash. Sadly, this isn't the only tree that was burned. There are trees all around here that are charcoal like this. Some had to be cut down, in fact. What hasn't cut down in abundance is cheatgrass. Some shrubs are present, but for the most part, cheatgrass wins the land over. Things have been done to try to keep cheatgrass to a minimum, but that too hasn't been very successful. If you are still trying to visualize cheatgrass, just take a walk in nature and you'll see it's that nasty stuff that sneaks into your shoe and pokes you non-stop. Boy, was I loaded. Now that I'm clean of the cheatgrass, I can continue my walk. Rehabilitation efforts to better the damaged forest included seeding from a helicopter and replanting pine trees, though only 1 of 6 planted trees was a success. Reseeding and replanting were in an effort to keep down the invasive weeds. Keeping invasive weeds out is important because they brown faster than native grasses, therefore making them easier to ignite during spring through fall. As I mentioned, rehabilitating an area is not only an attempt to keep down invasive weeds and the disturbance regime's danger down, but it is also an effort to keep our land beautiful and healthy. Rehabilitation works by competing with invasive weeds. That way the invasive weeds don't have as much soil and nutrients to grow in. Funding towards rehabilitation of wildlife is worth it. Growing up in this area, I would love to keep our land beautiful, not only as a way to protect ourselves, but also as a way to protect the land. Climate change adding to the problem is making this challenge more difficult, so we need to invest a little money for the land's sake and ours. Let's take a look at 2 of the ways rehabilitation is possible. One way to rehabilitate an area is by planting non-native flowers, and that is what has been done in this burned area. The flower I am holding is called Palmer's penstemon, and it is a beautiful, tall, blushing pink flower. There are many planted behind me, along with this little white flower with the yellow center called the prickly poppy. Planting flowers isn't the only way to compete with invasive weeds like cheatgrass. Drill seeding wheatgrass is another way also. Once again, the reason for seeding the different plants is to compete and hopefully win out the soil over invasive weeds. If and when the invasive weeds become much more, sheep grazing can be used, but it must be in really early spring when the invasive weeds are still green. Remember, invasive weeds like cheatgrass become brown faster than native grasses. The wheatgrass you see here was drill seeded in furrows, and it seems like they have been doing their job because not as much cheatgrass as non-rehabilitated burned locations is present. The wheatgrass is similar to the wheat we are used to seeing, but this type of wheat is called crested wheat bunchgrass. Although it seems this wheatgrass and the non-native flowers are doing their job, there is debate whether they should be seeded since they can add more fuel to the area. At the moment, the best we can do is watch over the area and hope it wins the fight to invasive weeds. This brings me to the end of my walk, and we have learned and seen a few things today. We can now realize how important it is to prevent a wildfire, especially now that spring and fall are longer, because once a fire hits, the consequences are not easy to handle. If a fire comes along, the land, animals, our homes, and lives are at stake, so we should do our best to inform others about the dangers. Who knows, maybe pulling out the cheatgrass in your yard can help make a difference. Thanks for coming with me on my walk. Goodbye.